Hello and welcome to Full Tech Ahead. I'm Amanda Razani, your host, and I'm excited to be here today with Kevin Vachon. He is the Corporate Development Officer for Mplify, formerly MEF. How are you doing?
Awesome, and thanks very much for having me here with you today.
Happy to have you on the show. So tell me what's behind the renaming of MEF to Mplify, and has anything changed about your offerings?
Well, we're excited about the change. It was kind of in the works for some time. Really, what drove it was the tremendous kind of expansion of our work well beyond our Ethernet roots over many, many years. And it got to the point where we felt that, the MEF, as much as we've got a great reputation and we've delivered some great things to the industry, probably that name was a bit limiting in scope in terms of what we were really doing. So that it was time, and I think the reaction thus far has been excellent. Everybody agrees, nice name, good name, time to change. So that's been kind of cool. The vision that we have, the work strategy, work plans has really been an evolution over many years now. So it really hasn't changed as a result of the brand. The branding is following the change. We've been very over the last couple of years, for example, we pivoted on the backs of a lot of work we've done. We pivoted towards network as a service as sort of our North Star strategy. And there's a big emphasis on building out, helping the industry build out, a full delivery ecosystem for network as a service. There's major components associated with that. The services work that we've done for many years in standardization and certifications, the automation work with our API standards, bringing the entire community and ecosystem together. So that work had started, and they were really building blocks for network as a service. We're well on our way, to executing it in that area, and we went looking for a name that would kind of fit that current vision, but also work beyond that. These things change over time. The work evolves, and you don't want to be locked in. So Amplify seemed to work, and yeah, we're excited about it.
Wonderful. So tell me more about your global alliance and what kind of organizations you're looking to work with.
Yeah, so if you think about network as a service, it's really about a fairly substantial number of companies coming together to form essentially a digital supply chain. So I'm a service provider and I'm selling something to an enterprise as a service. It may be, maybe it's a global network and I need a whole array of partners to deliver that. Last mile suppliers, data center operators, cloud providers, security vendors. And so what we are, Amplify Alliance, is really the group that's bringing that kind of community together. And so they're comprised of, starting with the end user community, enterprises, different types of service providers, different sizes, tier 1, 2, 3, retail, wholesale, data center operators. We now have system integrators, the whole range of technology vendors, OSS, BSS, security. So it's a really powerful ecosystem that's come together. Now, there's a really important element when you consider building an ecosystem for network as a service. An important element is where do standards play. So if you think about automation amongst all of these players, then it becomes quite logical and well understood that standardization at the API level, for example, makes sense. That's a really hot topic. So that's kind of the community we brought together. It's growing. They understand the value and they understand where collaboration is required and standardization is required. So it's kind of it's a pretty easy concept to grasp if you're in the space.
So, to that note, I know you offer some programs and certifications where you did under MEF. Are those still going to be available under the Amplify brand?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, in fact, the what we call the gold standard for carrier Ethernet services, and there's a whole range of service types, quite extensive, is called MEF 3.0. And it's quite so we have the services defined as that, which support many use cases, including forward-looking use cases like, you know, um, transport capabilities for AI between data centers, whatever. And we have a certification associated with that. So for the time being, that's not changing. There's a good brand recognition. It represents a generation of services and certifications. There are many companies that are using those marks today, and we're going to leave that alone. As we progress to new generations of network as a service certification, for example, then we'll look at the branding. The branding will evolve accordingly, but there's no real interest in not leveraging that track record.
Absolutely. So, are you experiencing any challenges or issues with trust and transparency in the cybersecurity area of this? And if so, how are you addressing this?
No, well, I think the issue of transparency is an objective we have in that's a role that we're playing in the industry. What we're trying to do with our SASE certification program, for example, it's a multi-phase program, and in the first phase, we're pushing the vendor community through an extensive set of tests, so the operators can see that these you know this pre-testing has been done against industry standards and other requirements. And the service providers can claim to their customers that this, testing has been done. So there's transparency in the context that this is what has been tested and this is what has not been tested. But perhaps an SD-WAN service that an operator would offer an enterprise customer based on some particular vendor equipment, that enterprise customer, that end user can see that this third-party testing has validated the claims of the vendor and the service provider. Now, we'll progress that to take it to another level over time where we'll see, for example, different components of SASE, like Zero Trust and SSC, along with SD-WAN. We'll see those implemented as they're we'll be conducting testing, for example, on a live network of those components, and ultimately the integration of those components as well. So, I think it's important to show the industry what's being tested, what's real, what's not, what the results are, and then the results of the output of these certification programs.
Can you share a little bit more about how you're supporting? It seems the industry is moving toward network as a service more and more. So, how are you supporting that moving forward?
Yeah, so I touched already on the fact that we're really, the platform that's bringing this ecosystem together. Automation of that ecosystem is the probably the biggest challenge, frankly. With network as a service, is to bring the ecosystem, and you're selling something on demand. It's going to have to be automated by the whole supply chain. So that's the obvious one. But we've supported in different ways. One is at the highest level, we've produced, for example, 2 generations of an industry blueprint. So it's sort of your North Star document. We complemented that with an end user perspective on network as a service. What does the end user community think about NaaS? What are the characteristics they're looking for? We actually leveraged our Enterprise Leadership Council, which was only about a year and a half old now. And it's got 14 large global multinational companies involved, and they're giving us the feedback on what they expect to see with NaaS. And so these are papers that can be published, to the industry, so they can kind of coalesce around this definition where the industry is going. And of course, as you know, because I think you've been there, we had our global NaaS event, which is really the only event around network as a service, pure NaaS event, where we bring all the thought leaders together. So you bring everybody, all the key movers and shakers, those that are driving industry together. You put them on stage, they meet. You bring all the bright minds together. You have an opportunity to move the industry forward.
Yeah, absolutely. It doesn't seem like it's already been a year since that last event. Can you share with our audience, when is that next event coming up? It's right around the corner.
Yeah, getting close. It's creeping up on us. November 10th to 14th. And we have actually 5-day program. The first day is just all of our leadership teams meeting, our board, our technology advisory board, our enterprise leadership council. So that's sort of closed sessions. We have 2 days of conference format, including, keynotes and breakout sessions. We have awards presentations. We have a lot of demonstrations, and then we have member work days on the back end of it. So that's where the actual work gets done. The standards work actually gets done by the guys doing a lot of heavy lifting. in the committees. And what we tried to do, is really to make sure there's a proper progression of the topics at that meeting, right? If you think what we did in the first year, it was sort of a state of the industry. It was the first year we did the event. Here's NaaS. Here's what people think about it, their perspective on it. In the second year, we were showing more around industry progress. Companies more demonstrations about NaaS capabilities, product announcements. You could see an advancement of the thinking from the presentations on stage. And I think obviously you're going to see, a progression of the industry itself, its state of the industry. But you've seen a kind of rapid evolution of the AI topic around NaaS, which really wasn't there a year ago. AI was more being talked about in the network context, a little bit more around AI within the network itself or network optimization. Now we're looking at how can network as a service with automation and our APIs and so on really and be an enabler of AI. How can enterprises buy AI as a service, different types of AI services? So it's quite an evolution. But you also don't want to just completely focus on that topic because it's hot, because there's a lot of different use cases for network as a service. And quite frankly, most of the operators that are going to implement it are starting with fairly basic use cases like transport connectivity on demand. Not so exciting, not so sexy, but that's the reality. They're taking a static services and they're delivering it on a demand basis, maybe with different billing models, and they're delivering it across the world, with an automated ecosystem. But it's nice to see that, the strategy you can implement with NaaS, the types of transport services that might be required to deliver it for one use case, the automation infrastructure can scale to AI and the speeds and performance that AI, demands. So yeah, so that's what we're tuning those topics and program as we speak.
Yeah, absolutely. And for our audience who might be interested, could you go into a little bit more detail about some real world scenario use cases, perhaps, utilizing these tools that I think would be helpful to our audience?
In terms of NaaS itself, NaaS use cases, yeah, I give you one of the most obvious ones where you'll see a progression from an enterprise. If I just look at it from an enterprise perspective, right? From an enterprise perspective, they want to be able to buy services in a more convenient and agile way. So they'll progress from putting orders into a carrier or service provider in a static, standard way to a more sophisticated portal, where they can go in and they can get their quotes and they can buy services and specify those services and check in on the progress of the implementation and performance. And so that's been a such sort of logical progression of the industry. And it's really the notion of I want to buy it, when I need it. And it could now be that I'm buying a bundle of services with a single SLA versus all independent services. But what you're seeing is the as a service type capabilities. More and more enterprises um, want the procurement and management of those services, but the onboarding and management of the services integrated into their own corporate IT environments. So if I'm a multinational, I might be dealing with 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 service providers, and I don't want 50 of these portals, right? So I've got my own ordering systems. I just want to integrate with them, and that's where the standards come in. So, the smaller organizations aren't going to necessarily have that integration level as a requirement. Um, the simpler the network environment, probably the smaller that requirement is. But the bigger they are, the bigger the significance is. So I think, network as a service, you're seeing obviously a lot of connectivity in terms of connectivity on demand, different types of connectivity, layer one, layer two, layer three, overlay services. You're seeing increased bundling of security When the service is procured, some of these services are procured, they'll have, SASE or components of SASE wrapped in together. And you'll see, SLAs being more of a wrapper around multiple services versus one. Now, now you take that sort of basic level and you go to another extreme. Back in Mobile World Congress, we demonstrated in partnership with service providers and some global system integrators, GPU as a service, which is, a pure AI use case where I just need to I want to, run models on GPUs by a service provider, hosted by a provider, wherever that is at the edge, I guess. And I want to, basically buy that service and all of the attributes and options associated with that service online through APIs. And you could see that over time, as AI becomes more of a prominent component of IT strategies, and that much of those, many of those models won't be necessarily hosted in-house. They'll be in the cloud somewhere. That interaction and automation between the end user and whoever's providing the service, you wouldn't want that to be cumbersome and slow, right? So yeah, there's a lot of different use cases, sort of depending on, what I guess to some extent in terms of offerings, how the service provider is trying to monetize their assets as well, right? Their infrastructure.
Absolutely. Thanks for shedding more insight on that. So from what you were sharing, it seems that then it's very important now more than ever to have collaboration between the service providers, the cloud providers, technology providers. There's got to be a good collaboration here.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, one thing that will drive collaboration, there's a lot of good reasons for companies to collaborate. But if there is a need for interoperability, it's just a fundamental driver. How can you have interoperability amongst a large community without standards? And it's essentially not possible to participate in that in an ecosystem, in a NaaS ecosystem, for example, if you can't interoperate. It's obvious to some, for the average maybe consumer, that they buy a phone or a device and it's got to be compatible with the Wi-Fi standards, right? Or your 5G standards. I mean, you wouldn't think of bringing something to market that's not compatible. It has to be interoperable. And so I think, the work that we're doing with NaaS ecosystem, interoperability is at the top of the list, and really high on that, within that bucket is interoperability of APIs for automation. Right? For years, we've actually delivered services standards, especially carrier Ethernet over many years, which enabled interoperability between service providers. I am service provider A in country A. I need to connect my network with service provider B somewhere else. I'm using these MEF certified services. It allows me to operate. And essentially what we did, with that is we created a global interoperable footprint of, in this case, carrier Ethernet services. And so if you look at what you're doing, if you're going to automate amongst all these providers, it's the same notion. You need to have some common approaches to things, right?
Yep, most definitely. And user expectations are just higher and higher, as we know.
Yeah. Now the fun thing is that, the notion of standards, it kind of comes in, goes into vogue and out of vogue, right? It's like, for a while, standards, why do I need standards? Some elements of the community will take that approach. The visionaries all kind of understand that, look, we don't need to be reinventing the wheel all the time. There's issues like interoperability, time to market for services. If I don't have to engineer something from scratch, a service, I can leverage a standard that makes sense. But for some organization, it's, standards, okay. But it's really interesting because that pendulum has totally shifted on the API front, where you'll never hear anybody argue about whether or not this industry needs a common set of standards. And, look, we're not just realizing this now. We started working on our API standards 10 years ago. And it took that long to get it right, to figure out, what were the types of APIs needed? How were we going to build out the standards? promote them, incubate them, go get traction, obviously create this essential global awareness. And you basically have to be there when companies are ready. Some of them aren't ready, so they pay attention to you for years before they actually do anything with your work, whereas others are leaders. So, I think we got out front on it, and it's paying dividends now because the adoption rate's pretty good of that work.
All right. Well, if there's one key takeaway you could leave our audience with today, what would that be?
Well, I think, just coming back to our name change from F to Mplify, we think it really does justice to our past. We kept the M. We started our word with M. I know we're just very proud of our history, everything we did with Carrier Ethernet. It's incredible that work that we did over, a 20 plus year period is highly relevant today. The standards are highly relevant. They're essentially very future proof, right? So on the one hand, we're really respecting the work that we did and the investments that these companies made in this work, was very much forward looking as well. And I think, with MEF's sort of pivot over time to network as a service as our sort of our vision, the building blocks for NaaS we bring to market, the community we bring together under the sort of the fresh, maybe more than a fresh name, but the fresh plan associated with Mplify. It's a great time for companies to get involved, and we're really excited about taking this thing forward.
Wonderful. Well, congratulations. It's exciting. And thank you so much for coming on the show.
Amanda, thanks for having me anytime. My pleasure.
And thanks to our audience. Stay tuned. There's more podcasts like this coming your way.